Hey everybody, it's Dredrick. Today we're going to be talking about Undead banking. It's going to be a little different than the last two we did, since we're not going to be looking at a replay. We're going to be playing around just a little bit in a game by ourselves, and I'm going to teach you three things. I'm going to tell you what banking is, why you should be doing it, and what types of armies you can make with Undead while you're banking. So first of all, what is banking? Banking is the term used to describe when you deliberately stay under 50 food, or up to 50 food, in order to keep yourself from going into upkeep. So let's talk about upkeep. Upkeep essentially is a mechanic that's meant to prevent people from sitting in their bases and making huge armies without fighting. Essentially, the higher that your food supply goes, the less money you get. So you can see right here, every time my acolytes gather gold, they're going to go ahead and get 10 gold at a time. But what happens if we go above 50 food? Now we're in low upkeep, and you can see every time they collect gold from that gold mine, they now only get 7. And if we take it even further, now we're in high upkeep and you only get 4 gold for every 10 that you should be getting. So this is a very clear sign of the fact that you're intended to be out there fighting, and you're not supposed to sit in high upkeep with a big army for a long period of time. You want to make those units and then put them to work right away. Okay, so we know what banking is now. Why do we want to do it? Well, there's a couple reasons that we want to bank, especially with Undead. First of all, the big one is that the other races tend to have a much easier time expanding than we do. We have to build a lot of buildings as Undead just to have a safe expansion, whereas other races, especially Orc and Night Elf, can pretty much just throw up the Great Hall or Tree of Life and leave it at that. Aside from that, Undead really likes its tier 3 tech options, so stopping to expand along the way slows us down from our really powerful units and upgrades. So it's better for us to go all the way up to tier 3 while staying under 50 food, so we have all this resource to put towards teching for really powerful units, as well as if we skirmish along the way, we can replace the units in our army very effectively without worrying about having inefficient income as we try to keep our army at that 50 food limit. A big part of the Undead's power comes from its heroes, especially as you get your Death Knight and Lich up to level 3 and creeping up close to level 5. That's a huge part of what makes Undead successful, so focusing a little bit less on getting a big army and more about getting powerful individual units and heroes, that's kind of the key to winning with Undead in a lot of situations. So let's take a look at what kind of armies we're going to be using when we bank with 50 food as the Undead, and take a look at the game plan for those kinds of armies. Alright, so this is our first example army. It's going to be the basic Tri-Hero composition. Tri-Hero is where we're going to use 3 heroes with the Undead, as well as our tier 3 advantage, which we're going to get before the other races. So that's going to give you Orb of Corruption and a Destroyer. Destroyers are very powerful units with Dispel. They're very hard to kill, they're magic immune. So having a single Destroyer round allows you to control the battlefield a lot better, especially in matchups if you remember the commentary against the Keeper of the Grove, where you can dispel important things like Polymorph. You can also use that against Hex. Something like this is going to be really effective against Human or Night Elf. You have 5 Fiends, which is a very good fighting force to help focus fire with this Lich, as well as a third hero, which can be the Dark Ranger in a lot of cases. You can use other heroes third. You could have a Dreadlord, for example, or the Tinker. Just sort of depends on what you need at the time, but all in all, this is a really good composition, which is very balanced and allows you to have a lot of flexibility. You can tech out of this in a lot of ways. You can start adding in other things like abominations, or against Night Elf you need meat wagons. You can start adding in more fiends, or you can switch into Gargs, which you won't do too much, but is possible. Another thing that's good about this is you have 1 supply left over, so if you want, you can go ahead and add a Shade to the composition. So this is a really cool one. I highly recommend this, and generally, if you don't have anything else to do, this is kind of where you want to go. You'll have 1 statue which you can cast the 2 healing spells from. Generally you'll want to leave it on healing your health and then manually cast mana. I recommend you figure out what the hotkey is for this or manually change it. I set mine to C and B and kind of play around with these two, so I'll usually leave it on healing and then click it and spam C, just like I'm spamming C for Death Coil. And that's a pretty cool way that you can kind of get a lot of value out of this in a fight, even though you don't have the second statue for the mana. But yep, the Tri-Hero comp composition, very tried and true, and highly recommended for most situations. There's not a lot of cases where you can go too wrong with this one. And did you think I forgot about ghouls? Because I certainly didn't. Ghouls are going to be a little bit different because instead of having a couple like with Crypt Fiends, you want a whole lot. Generally speaking, if you're going to be staying on ghouls long enough to get up to about 50 food, you're going to need to make a ton of them because with Ghoul Frenzy, you're going to make a really strong push. You probably aren't going to have this many ghouls for that long because once you make them, you're going to go fight with them and you're going to have to replace them with something else. But if those ghouls start to die, your army might look a little bit something like this. Here we have a Ghoul Fiend composition. This is something that's pretty common if you start with ghouls, where you start transitioning to Crypt Fiends. It's also something that if you end up playing against Mass Raiders, for example, you're going to want to start adding some ghouls into your army for that normal attack damage. This is pretty surprisingly effective against air compositions. If you ever find yourself playing against Wyverns, or maybe if you want to try something different against Night Elf air like the Fairy Dragons, maybe give Ghoul Fiend a shot and you might be surprised how well it does at killing all those air units when the fiends web them and pull them to the ground, and then the ghouls just beat the heck out of them until there's nothing left. And speaking of air units, doesn't Undead have some air too? Well, yes, as a matter of fact, it does. In Undead Mirror and occasionally versus Night Elf, you might find yourself making gargoyles. There's other situations where they've been used in the past, but nowadays, for the most part, you're going to be using gargoyles if you start Lich first in Undead Mirror. But in that case, if you're banking with gargoyles, you're going to want to spend a lot of food on the gargoyles. You pretty much are going to want to make about a full control group from here. You see we have 11 in this example. One statue or so just for the healing is very effective because you have so many units that it's a lot of value. But besides that, you're going to want a ton of gargoyles. When you start making gargoyles, they're not a unit that you make a couple of unless you're trying to pick off a really high priority target. Say your opponent's making a few Chimera or they're making Frostwyrms. You might make just a couple of gargoyles in that situation to pressure it. But when you're doing a gargoyle based army, you want a lot of gargoyles. That's kind of how they do their damage. And also note that gargoyles, they may cost about 190 gold, so they're expensive, but they're only 2 food. So if you do go for the Ghoul Garg army in Undead Mirror, you're not going to be too worried about breaking 50 food accidentally. You can make a whole heck of a lot of gargoyles before you really start to notice the pressure against your supply count. So yeah, this is a pretty fun one to try out in Undead Mirror if you haven't used Lich and gargoyles before. It's quite fun. Next, we've got a 2-base option. So this one, if you notice, we don't have a third hero. Why is that? Well, it's because we've got 5 supply we have to spend on Acolytes. If you end up getting into a situation where you've expanded, this is a pretty good option. You notice that in addition to missing this third hero, we're also not using a Destroyer, and we've got an extra Crypt Fiend. So if you're going for an expansion earlier in the game, you're not going to have as much money to spend on cool tech toys, so you might end up just getting an extra Crypt Fiend, for example, to protect your expansion more, to have more of a fighting army, and we don't quite have that resource for a second Destroyer. Maybe we don't have the supply for it, at least in this situation, so 2 statues is might something you'll see instead. Again, this isn't mandatory. This is just one option that you can use, or one thing that you might end up with in this situation, depending on game flow. It's always going to vary. Now hang on a second, you're saying, this looks just like that tri-hero composition, but where's the third hero? Well, instead of a third hero, we got one of these. That's right, the Frostwyrm. This is a pretty cool one you can try against Undead Mirror. It's very effective. It can also be good against a Night Elf that's going for bears, or if you're playing against a Orc player that skips the Bestiaries and goes for the Tauren Totem as their only tier 2 building in order to get Spirit Walkers and Tauren at tier 3. This Frostwyrm will really mess them up. Basically, this is just the same thing as the tri-hero composition, but instead of having a Destroyer and a third hero, we're going to use this Frostwyrm as our big punch as the third weapon. One thing about the third hero for Undead is that you're not really going to get a hero that's super effective in combat by themselves. They're generally just going to be there for whatever spell that they're casting, whether it's sleep to take out a priority hero, the Crypt Lord's Impale to crowd control, or something like the Dark Ranger's Silence to give you a little bit more battlefield control. The Frostwyrm can absolutely do that. He can do a ton of damage to mess up heavy armored units, as well as applying that slow can be very effective against a hero like the Blade Master or against the Demon Hunter, kind of keeping them slowed down so they can't chase you around and they don't attack quite as fast. It's very nice. It's situational, you can't always use it, but this is a really fun one in any games that you can get that Frostwyrm out. One of the reasons that we're skipping the third hero in this composition is because this Frostwyrm does take so much lumber and so much tech. You sort of aren't going to have the resources to get this Frostwyrm out as fast as possible if you also go and invest all that in the third hero. So this one is something that you're going to do situationally, but man, is it awesome when you bust out that Bone Dragon and put him to work. And that's it. That's everything I have to say about banking right now. I hope this cleared up some of the concepts for newer players, as well as maybe introduced some of you intermediate or advanced players to an idea or two for unit composition that you might not have thought of at 50 food. It's all flexible and it all depends on the game that you're playing, so take it in stride and try some things out for yourself. As for what I'm going to be doing next, I know this one was more aimed at the beginners. I've seen a lot of new players out there really looking for some way to get a foothold on how to play this game, so I really want to be there for those new Undead players, and I really want to help you guys learn how to play. But for those of you that are not new, intermediate and advanced players out there, hang on tight because we're going to be covering some really advanced stuff too. Some really complex timings, things about how to play certain maps specific ways, and maybe about exploiting some of the new meta strategies as the meta evolves and as new patches come out in the future for Reforged. Now, I've also had some people talking about other races, non-undead races, so I've been making a big effort to watch more replays for games that do not have undead, because I know I had a couple people talking to me about maybe some Night Elf stuff, talking about the other side of the Demon Hunter matchup, playing as the Demon Hunter, as well as some human questions. So I'm going to be working on that. It'll probably be a little bit before I get around to getting away from undead entirely, but I want to look at covering some undead matchups, maybe from the other perspective, helping out the other races playing against undead first, and then we'll branch out into different races once I've had a little bit more time to get more familiar with how to talk about games from the other races' perspective. So I think what I'd like to do is, in the short term, maybe put out one educational video for beginners a week, one video that's more of a commentary on a game for more advanced players, and then maybe one video that's either off race, not undead, or is like a cheesy kind of fun joke strat. There's a couple I wanted to look at, like a Crypt Lord push or the Lich Tower Rush versus Orc. Those are some really cool, fun strategies. So that's kind of what I'd like to do in the meantime. I'm going to be playing around with the format a little bit and seeing if I can get the workflow down so I'm able to get videos out more consistently throughout the week. I'm thinking probably like 2 videos on the weekends, like a Friday and a Sunday video or something like that, and then 1 video in the middle of the week. Or maybe I'll just steal day 9's Fun Day Monday and then do like a Friday or Saturday video, a Monday video, and then 1 in the middle of the week, something like that. Not entirely sure, it'll kind of depend, but that's the idea, that's what we're looking at. So anyone that's been watching these, I appreciate it. Hopefully there's some give and take, some reciprocal obligations here, and you've enjoyed the videos that I've done so far, and some of the information has been useful to you. Maybe if you're not an Undead player, you learn just something about how I look at and analyze games in general. But yeah, so that's the goal, that's what we're looking at right now, and that's where I'd like to go in the near future. I think when Reforged comes out, my goal is I would like to be able to be one of the people out there that are able to help new Undead players get introduced to the game, and depending on how long till the game comes out and everything like that, maybe other races as well. So we'll see how that goes, but I really do want to be there to support the Warcraft community and the Undead community as the game goes from Warcraft 3 to Warcraft 3 Reforged, and everybody's kind of settling into the game, coming back to it. So if you do have any topics, I know one request that I got was covering the Farseer matchup, and another that I mentioned was the Demon Hunter matchup as the Demon Hunter against Undead. So I will definitely be taking a look at those. I've been skimming the replays that have been coming up on Warcraft 3.info, and I've kind of saved a couple replays that came up that I thought were interesting for the Farseer matchup. And so I'll be watching those and taking a look at them. But for right now, this one was for the newbies out there. So if you're trying to figure out how to play Undead, damn it, I hope you learned something from this one. So I also want to kind of update the build order guide. There's a video, I can't remember the name of the guy that did them, but he did build orders for every race. I want to do that for Undead, but cover it a little more in depth, because Undead, really build orders are difficult for Undead, more difficult for any other race, because it's very dependent on the matchup and the map. There's like 8 different build orders you can do with Undead. It's crazy. So that'll be the next new player video that I do, is going to be Undead build orders. And then the next advanced replay that I do is probably going to be covering the Orc matchup from the Undead perspective, because that's a really tough one. And then I think I'm going to be doing Lich Tower Rush. So look forward to that. Lich Tower Rush versus Orc, and maybe a standard game versus Orc. And then we're going to talk about some Undead build orders for the newbies out there. Specifically, not just telling you what the build orders are, but when you want to use them. Because I think that's really important with Undead, is figuring out when to use these build orders. So anyways, I've rambled on at the end of this video enough. This has gone on pretty long already. And I just think we'll go ahead and end it here. So I will see you folks in the next one. See you later.